He's Howard Eibach, a former copywriter and creative director and the author of 2 books on the creative brief.
And he's Henry Gomez, an ad agency strategist with 27 years of experience. Together, we're the Brief Brothers. We love talking about creative briefs, briefing, and advertising. We're back with another episode, Henry. Today we have a guy from Colorado named Jason Swenk. He is a podcaster, the host of, according to his family, the #1 digital agency podcast in the universe. He's going to tell us a little bit more about himself. He's a cool guy. He's doing some really interesting things. Let's join the conversation. So, Henry, we're back with another episode of the Brief Brothers. Today we have with us Jason Swenk. Jason is a man of many talents. He is living in Colorado. He owns and is the host of a podcast called the Smart Agency Masterclass that he's been doing, I think now, since what, 2014, 2015?
A long time.
A long time. And we're going to get into the details of that. So I just want to stop and say, Jason, welcome to the Brief Brothers. Henry and I are grateful that you could join us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys.
I was a guest on your podcast some time ago. It was a wonderful experience to talk to you. Let me get a sense of what it is that you describe as the purpose, the vision of your podcast, Smart Agency Masterclass, so that we can kind of use it as a jumping off point for our discussion.
Sure. Yeah. I started an agency in 99 by accident. Like most agency owners, we're all accidental. We knew how to do something cool and someone offered us money and, it continued to kind of, steamroll. Right. And then we kind of got overwhelmed. And so my whole goal was to create a resource I wish I had. And I wanted to hear what other agency owners were talking about. I wanted to connect agency owners so they didn't feel that they were alone. So I wanted to share real agency stories, real agency strategies, and real things that they can take away and go do. And so that's been the whole premise of the podcast or the agency mastery that we created. It's just connecting like-minded agency owners, showing them the systems or the strategies that they can build upon, not just copy, right? Like I always hate when people take this exact copy, build upon it and then make it their own.
And how did you stumble across this? I'm guessing that you learned some valuable lessons in the process of running your agency for what is it, about 12, 13 years?
Yeah.
Before you leaped into this business of consulting and teaching and helping others?
All my most successful businesses were by accident. Like I told you, one of my best friends looked like Justin Timberlake back in the late 90s. And that's when I created a fake band, fake website called In Shit, making fun of NSYNC. And then people asked me to design websites, right? So, and that was a huge success because we were able to exit that business and sell it. And this business was the same. I had people reaching out to me after I sold and was like, hey, how'd you work with clients like LegalZoom and Hitachi? How'd you sell? How'd you have all these people? How'd you manage? How'd you still go to the racetrack and race cars? How'd you do all? So I was like, well, let me kind of put all this together and kind of share my knowledge. And then over time of just interviewing amazing agency owners all over the world, I even picked up even more. So, and then I even have another agency now that we started about 3 years ago. That's one of the fastest growing in North America right now. So, and that's not voted by my family.
Yeah, let's put some context here. The podcast that Jason runs, the Smart Agency Masterclass, was voted the #1 digital podcast in the universe by his family. So let's just make sure we understand that. And of course, who's gonna argue with that, right?
I'm not.
You took your first job out of college. You graduated from Florida State. Did I get
Florida,
that right?
Make sure you add the state to it. That's important. We don't want to confuse people. I went to Florida. Yeah, no. And I know you're in Miami now, I heard. No,
but I'm a Gator. I went to the University of Florida.
What were you doing with your thumbs just off camera there, Henry? We don't need to know.
He's doing the stupid chomp.
Oh, okay. I noticed that your first job out of college was as a consultant. And so and I'm going to guess, and correct me here, Jason, that you had some fundamental skills you acquired being a consultant that you've taken into what you're doing now. What did you learn with that it was one of the major accounting agencies, and I forget the name now. Your
Yeah,
first job.
Arthur Anderson, the
Arthur
paper shredding
Anderson.
company. Yeah.
Right.
This is going to surprise you. I learned absolutely nothing
Okay.
from them. Like nothing. And the only thing I really, and the Gator will like this. The only thing I really, I learned really kind of two things at Florida State. One is how to socialize. The second one was how to outsource and how to delegate to other people. So I paid people to do my programs. I paid people to I made sure I managed. I was a project manager. So I'd be like, oh yeah, you do that, you do that, you do that. And then they never knew I wasn't doing anything. And so those are the two things I learned that I took with me later on. And then, when I started the agency, like I said, it was by accident. I was working for Arthur Anderson at the time. They never had a project for us. This was in 99. And so the dot bomb was happening and all the businesses were starting to crumble because I was only there for 6 months. But that's when I started designing websites. And then I started designing websites for other people. And so when it came time, where they were doing all these layoffs, I was like, cool, man. Like I'm designing all these websites, making money on the side. Let's go ahead and jump in and do this.
Is your background art or art direction?
I was a cartoonist for many years. And so I always liked, and I was always creative, and I was always good at putting colors and stuff together, a lot better than numbers and programming, even though my degree was in programming, but I paid people to do my programs.
Okay, so you spent 6 months at Arthur Anderson, and then you jumped to, if I remember your background, you jumped right into podcasting pretty much right away.
No, I didn't. I didn't do podcast.
No, that's right. You started an agency. It was called
I ran
Solar
an agency.
Velocity.
Yep, ran an agency, Solar Velocity, for 12 years.
Right, and it was in Atlanta. Okay,
Yep.
So were you the creative director? You were the CEO, the founder, creative director. What was your role there, and how did you? What tell us about that experience?
Well, in the beginning, for many years, I was everything. I was the janitor, the secretary, the phone, the sales, everything. Right. And then maybe after a couple of years going by, then I really kind of started transforming to the CEO. Like, it probably took us, because my first client, I even remember this, I knew nothing about business. I mean, I was always a hustler as a kid, like selling golf balls back to golfers and, all these
Like
weird.
you dive for them in the lake and
Yep. Yep.
Wow.
Exactly. Go in the marshes, and then your buddy would have to be with you so he could pull you out when you get stuck in the mud.
Or
Like,
the alligator. Crazy. I mean, you're talking about in Florida, or is this someplace else?
Florida.
There's alligators in Florida.
Yes, there are.
There are. They're good tasting.
Are you speaking as the alligator or as the alligator?
No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. I just like to beat up my Florida friends.
But okay, we all can't be blessed to be gators. I sympathize.
I know.
Okay.
I know.
Well, the reason I'm backing up here and getting your background is because what you do now, it really fascinates me. Because Henry works at an agency in Miami at Zubin. He's worked for a number of agencies over his 27-year career. I spent 26 years in the agency world working for some legacy shops. Started off with a little shop in Milwaukee, and then went to some legacy shops and bounced around the country until I lost my job, and then decided I was too old, wasn't going to get anywhere, and I didn't have that hustle gene that you have, Jason. So I went into teaching and writing, and that's what I love to do. And Henry and I love to talk about the nitty gritty, the nuts and bolts of this process called writing a brief and putting the brief together. And that is an important role in the agency world. You're a few notches higher up in that, what we call the C-suite. If I were an agency owner today, and it's neither in my genes or it's in my ambitions, but if I were an agency owner today, and I came to you to be part of your training, and I said to you, I'm doing 80, 90, 100 hours of work a week because I'm doing everything. What are some of the first things that you would ask me and have me do to do a better job of being less of an owner and more of a CEO?
Yeah, when someone's working all the time and it's not their choice to work all the time, like if you want to work all the time and it's your choice, perfect, right? Like you're where you're supposed to be. But most people don't want to work 80 hours and miss kids events and be able to do, other stuff outside of work. But there's certain people that want to do that. So, but if you're more of the majority, I would say we need to kind of get some clarity, right? Like if you go back to my origin story and many people's origin story, they were accidental. So when you're accidental, what are you doing? You're reacting to what's coming to you and you're reacting to the market rather than having a plan or a defined vision of where you need to go. It's kind of like I'm in a boat from Miami to London, right? And I don't tell my team where we're actually going. But after about 10 hours, I get pretty sleepy. I want to go to sleep. And I say, hey, wake me up if the boat changes course, which I'm waking you up every second. And then if I just told them where we're going, now they can make better decisions and they could actually make decisions for the company, which makes the owner, gets them out of being like the toll booth owner, right? Like everything, like you have 30 lanes, but everyone's just one lane is open. And that's because they have to go through you.
I wonder how much of that difficulty transitioning, because I've seen it. I've worked in small agencies and I've worked in larger agencies. And to me, it's a question of scalability, right? Can you take what you have with 20 people and scale it up to 200 people? And a lot of times the biggest obstacle to that is not the circumstances, but the personality of the founder or the principal. I left one agency. I was asked to leave. Let's put it that way. And afterwards, I was having drinks with some of my former colleagues, and I was lamenting the fact that I was trying to help the owner grow the agency and scale it up, and that he kind of resisted me at every step and wanted to micromanage everything. And this colleague of mine said, "You don't get it, do you?" For him, it's about control. He'd rather control a smaller, less profitable agency that makes him less money than cede control and have a bigger, more successful agency that he doesn't completely control. So there's sometimes, it's just a personality thing. There's no getting around it. And I think, I guess the only solution would be for the person to become really introspective about how much their desire is to grow a big profitable business that eventually they could retire from, versus how much is I just want to micromanage and kind of control my own domain.
Well, it all comes down to vision, right? Like that owner had a vision of, hey, I only want this. But then the other part is, what type of employees do we want? What kind of core values do they need to have? Like, what do they need to believe in? Because I always tell people, and this is the big mistake I made in the very beginning, I thought I had to hire my twin, because if there was two of me, man, we can get double. But if there's two of me, we're just talking about great ideas and no one's executing, right? But if I can get people that believe in the vision, like for example, a couple of years ago, I had my team for the agency Mastery 360. I said, we're going to write an article, or we're going to create a blog post of the top 20 conferences agency owners need to go to. So they came back with 20, they wrote it, really great article, but they had like 3 people in there that I just hated. I was like, no, take those 3 people out. They're assholes, right? And they go, well, and they know the vision. And that I told you guys for this business is to create a resource I wish I had. And they go, well, is it a good conference for agencies, or you just don't like them? I said, I don't like them. And then I'm like, okay, you can keep them in there, right? Because the vision will dictate where you go. And the vision, so some people have a vision to create a big agency that they can have the option to sell. Some people want to create an incubator agency where they can use the agency to build other technology and other businesses, right? That's kind of what like Gary Vaynerchuk does at VaynerMedia. You can create other agencies, that, are a lifestyle business, which it sounded like that was the type of agency that you worked with at one time, right? So there's no right or wrong answer. There's just the right one for the owner and then the right one for the employees, and they just all need to align. That's why having a vision of where you're going and who you want on the boat is so important. So like if you're working all those amount of hours, we need to figure out where are we going, because and like what types of clients we want. Do we want really big clients? Do we want small clients? Do we want a lot of clients? Right? Like that will dictate everything, because once we have clarity, now we can start moving up the ladder and talking about how do we position the agency so we don't look like every Me Too agency out there. We can look like a new one, or what's the right offering, so then I can win deals faster and I don't have to write these long briefs or whatever it is, right? Like, it's all starts with clarity, figuring out where do we need to go, who do we need, and then, we can start executing on it. Because if you're just being reactionary, you're kind of screwed.
Is this vision you're talking about something that you work on when you when people come to you for your I guess I don't want to call it a workshop or seminars or training, or is this something that they have already, or
when
a
they
little
come
bit of both?
to join our mastermind, we make them do a couple different exercises. And this was an exercise that I learned. I literally, at the time, this was maybe 8 years or maybe 6 years into owning the first agency. We were about 2 million in revenue. I hated it. I literally wanted to quit. And at the time, I literally started taking a job interview because I was literally going to shut it down. I was just that miserable. And I think a lot of people have gotten to that point. And they asked me 2 questions on this interview. And I kind of went back. I was like, I could actually do this at the agency. And so one of the exercises I created from that is like, if you take a sheet of paper out, put it on your desk, put your fist, put it on the sheet of paper and draw a circle around it. Then spend about 30 minutes writing out all the stuff you hate doing and you never want to ever do in the agency ever again outside that circle. And so you spend about 30 minutes doing that. Like, is it project management? Is it account management, sales, proposals, whatever it is, right? And then you spend the next 30 minutes writing everything that you love doing it. So then that will give you a clear direction of, what do I want? Where do we need to go? Who do I need to hire? What do I need to say no to? And so it's just a real easy exercise everybody can do in order to get that clarity.
Are the people who come to you for advice, they're what you're saying, that if I'm understanding you correctly, they're self-selecting. These are people who know that something's wrong and they need this assistance in finding that clarity.
Right. I only work with people that know there's a problem and they want to make a change. Like, I'm never trying to, we see it all. Like, I hardly get on social anymore, like browsing like I used to, because I see so many bad ads like that are trying to convince or trick me. Like, I can book you 80 calls a day, or I give you money, or like, I'm like, or here's how to create $100 million agency. And I literally want to comment, but people find out later. I'm like, yeah, start with a 10 or $100 million agency. It's just like craziness.
I was, as I was saying before we hit the record button, I was watching one of the videos on your website. And by the way, I encourage everyone watching, whether you run an agency or not, just to go on to Jason's website. It's really well done. And I guess you used to do this for a living, so you know what you're doing when you're putting it together. But the video is really good. You talk about the importance of creating systems, and there were 5 points that you identified that you need to ask, you meaning agency owner, aspiring CEO. Could you talk for a moment about what do you mean when you say system? And if you don't mind sharing those 1 or 2 of those 5 points that you think are really critical.
Yeah. So I look at scaling an agency as really in 8 systems. I've already kind of talked about one. It's around clarity, right? We have to have clarity of where we're going. The next one is positioning. We need to know how to position our agency in a way where we don't look like everybody else. Right?
Whoa. Isn't that remarkable? That sounds exactly like what you're supposed to do with a product.
Exactly.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yep, exactly. And when you position, the way you can position yourself to not look like everybody else is, one, you got to pick who's your audience, like, and really narrow down into it. And then it's all about asking the right questions and starting off. Like, if you go to jasonswenk.com/about, if you look at that homepage or on the about page, I don't talk anything about me until the very bottom.
Right.
I'm asking questions.
Mhm.
Now, I use this, like, think of this as an example when we would go to conferences and you'd have that creepy person come up to you, probably went to Florida. No, I'm just kidding. He's not laughing. He's not laughing. Um, maybe he went to Florida State, and all he does is talk about himself all the time. Hey, I ran an agency. I sold an agency. I can help you. You're like, get the hell away from me. But if I come up to you at the conference and says, hey guys, I'm Jason. Why'd you come to the conference? Tell me a little bit more about your business. I'm asking questions. It changes that perspective of asking questions to put the attention on them, not you. What the biggest thing that agencies do wrong when they position themselves is they constantly talk about their awards, their people, their process, all that kind of stuff, which no one cares, right? But if you can ask questions like, do you want to generate more leads for your real estate business? Or if you're targeting nonprofits and you want to help get more members, donors, and volunteers, we can help you. And oh, by the way, we do this by designing websites, right? So there's a different way to position. So then once you have the positioning, now you can figure out the right offering. And that's kind of system 3, where you're thinking about, what do I need to charge? And most people kind of lead with their huge retainer, right? Like I used to do this a long time ago. I remember Lotus Cars, they came to us and they were like, oh, we want you to kind of pitch us to be an agency of record and all this kind of stuff. And so people were doing these huge, all this, like responding to the RFPs, which I always treat RFPs as request for punishment, real effing problem, all that kind of stuff, right? So we always try to avoid them, or unless we could write them. And so it's all about figuring out what's the right offer. And so when these big companies would come to us, we would actually change the conversation and we'd position ourselves in a different way, where we'd say, hey, I know you want a proposal on this, but I don't think you have enough information in order to, or like, we don't have enough information from you, and I don't know if you have the right plan in order to execute on this. So what we'd like to do is spend 2 hours with you. It's a paid engagement. We charge a minimal fee. I say something like, here's the 3 possible outcomes from this blueprint that we're going to put together with you. And that's the key, with you. I'll be like, you'll love the plan. You'll go execute it yourself. If that's the case, I wish you luck. Number 2, which is the most common, you'll love the plan. You want our help. Number 3, if you hate the plan, I'll give your money back. So there's nothing for you to lose. So what I'm doing is I'm getting them to pay me a small amount, which now makes them 20 times more likely to pay me again.
Right.
And now I'm starting to build trust, and it's an easier yes, rather than saying yes to $1 million project. And then I can kind of step them up. And then at the end of the day, I can charge them a lot bigger retainer based on value rather than time and materials, because I've already built trust with them. Does it make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's really fascinating to me because I hear this all the time when I'm scrolling through LinkedIn, how poorly ad agencies and advertising professionals promote themselves.
Yep.
And you're providing, if not the solution, some really key ingredients on how to do this. And that to me is remarkable, because it's a wide open niche that you've started to fill. How many people have you? Because another thing that I noticed on your website, you said one of the things I try not to do is, I'm going to phrase this poorly because I'm paraphrasing. Just, you're not trying to drum up business. You're trying to make yourself the magnet for business, that people come to you rather than you drumming up the business themselves.
Well, I think you need to have 3 channels. One is an inbound channel, like having it where they're coming to you.
Right.
I look, and this is part of one of the systems, like if we skipped ahead to like prospecting after offering, right? Like you need to have 3 channels. It's kind of like a 3-legged stool. We need to have an inbound channel. We have to have an outbound system or a channel. And I also look at it as strategic partnership channel. So if one goes down, you still at least can balance on the stool, rather than just be dependent on one. And most agencies are just dependent on referrals, which just isn't scalable.
Well, I already know that I'm going to go back and rewrite my about page.
Yes, everybody should.
Yeah, yeah, it's too much about me and not about what you need that I can help you with.
Yeah.
And
If you, and if you
that's the
start,
only reason we invited you on the show here, Jason, so you could tell me how I could
Free
fix my website.
advice.
there you
Yeah.
go. I mean, that's also a great reason to do a podcast, because the amount of people that you can have access to, like, I had Seth Godin on the show, I had Gary on the show. Like when I first reached out to them, they had no clue who we were, but they're like, I want to highlight you. I want to highlight you for your audience because you have this book coming or whatever it is. And then, yeah, you can get great advice and you learn tons.
Yeah. Since I've been doing this podcast with Henry, I do my own training around the creative brief. I've written a couple of books on the brief, but talking with Henry every week for the last over 2 years about this, I've learned a ton from him. He's a strategist. He writes briefs for a living. I'm the guy who gets the briefs, or used to, when I was an active creative. And, all I could do is bitch and moan. It's like, oh, that's a terrible brief. But I didn't have the right questions. I didn't know what to ask. Like, how do
That's
we
right.
make this better? So the act of doing this podcast has been tremendous, because now when I go out and do trainings, I'm quoting Henry all the time. Henry should get a cut, I suppose. Let's not talk about that, Henry.
Henry, send him the contract after.
Right, exactly.
I say I do it for love of the game. If I can
Yeah.
help Howard a little bit and his workshops, and because I truly believe in what he's doing, and that's the story of how I met Howard. I got his first book. I was a self-taught strategist, so I was always looking for materials to help me, and I got his book, and then I brought it to my boss and I said, I'd like to bring this guy to do a workshop here at the agency. And she's like, yeah, let's do it. And he came, and that's how we became friends. And it's been, I don't know, something like 10 or 12 years now.
Yeah, about 10.
Well, that's the key and that's where agencies kind of fall down a lot, is they just want to do something to get something. But the agencies that give, and then they have like an ask, it's kind of like Gary's book, I think, what, jab, jab, right hook, or something like that, right? Like those are the ones that benefit because they're trying to help out without asking. Like people don't join our mastery or our mastermind until maybe 2 or 3 years of listening to the podcast. Like we gave them so much, and we've changed their agency just from listening to the show or the free content we put out. They're like, oh, what do we get when we engage with this community, right? Like, so, and even if they never do engage with us, we're perfectly fine, right? It just goes back to like, I want to create a resource, we wish we had. And that's the whole premise, right? Like, and everyone can get, like, everyone on my team gets on board with that. So there's no pressure. Like even when you chat with an agency scale specialist, AKA salesperson, right? They're giving the whole time. And they're not always just trying to sell the thing that they want to sell. They'll position the thing that the person actually needs.
Yeah.
And they'll actually say no if it's something that like we can't help, right? Like, and that's a different mentality for a lot of agencies.
It's an ancient concept of, you give to receive. The more you put out there, the more it comes back to you. And I've been asking a lot of questions about what you're doing because I'm starting to see, well, actually I saw this before we even started the conversation. I started to see this initially when I talked to you on your show, which is that the premise of your vision, that's helping the owners create their vision so that they can make their agencies work smarter and better, with this process and these systems you're talking about, are identical to how you sell a product, positioning, having a vision, but they're also fundamental to what Henry and I talk about all the time about writing a creative brief. You can't write a creative brief without having a clear vision of what your product is, and an ability to summarize that in a phrase or a sentence. So we're going from what Henry and I do and talk about is like, this is at the granular level, and what you're talking about is at a much larger enterprise level to allow us to do the granular stuff. And to me, it's confirmation that it's all part and parcel of what we're doing, just at different levels. But we learn from each other about how to do it well, what works for you, and telling and sharing with your CEO aspirants is what's going to work best for a young, aspiring creative brief writer. It may not seem like that on the surface, but it really is.
Mhm. It is. Yeah. I mean, this stuff is, people like to overcomplicate everything. And if you just kind of peel back the layers and just make things simple, I mean, I played tennis in college. And so I remember playing this individual, and they were under my level, but they were beating me. And I remember looking at the coach, because I was probably a little tennis brat, like throwing the racket around and jumping on the fence like an idiot. And he was like, just go back to the basics. You're overthinking. And I was like, oh, just keep my eye on the ball, put the racket back and hit it. And then I wound up winning. So it's the same thing in business. Like, we overcomplicate things, but I certainly understand, because like, I know how we can overcomplicate. Like, I was chatting with some of our members the other day, and they were like, they have drinking games. Like when I say, you should have a podcast or you should raise your pricing, right? Like, and I tell people that, like, cause it's so easy to do, but getting that mentality to make that commitment in order to make that switch and change up their thinking, a lot of times is a lot harder. And they were kind of being like, you need to show more empathy on that. And I'm originally a New Yorker, so empathy doesn't really happen in New York. It's kind of like survive or die. And so I was like, I certainly understand that. So like, I understand, like, when I say just go back to the basics or we're overcomplicating, I understand, like, it's hard to do that when we're so ingrained and we have all these big decisions. And like, some of these decisions are the life or the death of the agency in the owner's eyes, when necessarily it's not. It's just like, we're overcomplicating everything. But like, if you guys take away anything, just make things simple. One of the phrases I always kind of look at is, and this is coming from an ADD person, or what is it?
ADHD.
See, I can't even say that, right?
Yeah.
So, right, like, focus. If you think of like this acronym or whatever it is, like, finish one commitment until success. So if you look at the biggest item, I think Stephen Covey said this, like, if you have, let's say you have two glasses, and if this is just audio, then you can't, I'll give you the visual. Like, let's say you have two glasses.
This is video.
Okay. Two glasses the same size. And I wish I had a baseball. Let's say I have a baseball, and I put the big baseball in, and then I try to put some pebbles and then put sand. Well, it's not going to fit in the glass. Right. But if well, I think I said that backwards. Like, if I put all the little stuff in first and then put the baseball, it's going to fit like this, right? But if I put the baseball in first and then the smaller items in after, everything's going to fit perfect. Meaning, do the biggest impact items first. All right. So that's what finish one commitment till success means, rather than try to do everything.
It's also, I think, a powerful argument against multitasking. It's like, do one thing that you can do and do it well.
Yeah.
And then I think I came across a line somewhere on your website. You were quoting a businesswoman who gave you some advice you never forgot, which was breaking an old habit is harder than forming a new habit. I think that's, if I paraphrase that. I mean, I know what you have to do to form a new habit. You've got to do something over again. I think, what is it, 30 days? If you do it every day for 30 days, you'll build a habit. But breaking an old habit, that's hard. It's like quitting smoking, quitting drinking, quitting anything. That's a kind of a habit you want to stop. But there's also habits that we fall into when we are managing a business, or writing a brief.
I think one of those habits, and I think you kind of like, I think we've danced around it, but it sounds like for a lot of these agency owners and CEOs, is the habit that needs to be broken is not saying no. In a lot of cases, you talked about RFPs, you talked about client requests where they're asking for something, but it's not altogether clear that it makes any sense why they're asking for what they're asking. And so I think that it's really part of this is being selective in what you do and learning how to say no.
Yeah. I mean, the old saying is like, if you say yes to everything, you're saying no to the things you should be actually doing. Right. Like, for example, like what you you're probably talking about scope creep, right? Like in the agency, that's always huge. The client always asks for stuff outside of scope, right?
Yeah.
And what do agencies do? They want to keep the client happy. And then they kind of start, really getting mad at the client, but the client doesn't, they're like ignorant to the process. Like when I was building my house in Colorado, I was ignorant to the building the house process. I was like, oh, can we do this after you built the, like, can we make the room bigger after you already built the house? Right. Like, yeah, we could, but it's going to change the scope. And one of the best ways, just a little hint to get rid of scope creep almost altogether, is remember this: do $0 change orders. So your clients will come to you for some requests. Some of them are small, some are big. All the small ones, do a $0 change order and make your client sign it. And you do that 3 or 4 times.
That's pretty smart.
Right?
Yeah.
Then when they come to you with the big item, you go, man, that's a pretty big item. We certainly can do this. It's going to push down the timeline. We've already given you like 4 or 5. You don't tell them that they were small.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's training. Like I always like to tell people, you're either
Like
training
just the act of having to sign off on something that says $0 is planting the seed in their head that the next one might not be $0.
Exactly.
And they're going to appreciate that you're doing it for $0, but it's also perhaps going to, like, there's not going to be a shock that they say, yeah, that one's going to cost you $5,000.
Yep.
Or whatever the amount, or 20 grand.
That's kind of forming a new habit and breaking an old habit at the same time, which I like, which is pretty cool. Yeah, this is we don't really talk about this kind of stuff, Jason, and I think it's relevant to a kind of a bigger picture thing that we need to remind ourselves that the luxury that we have to write a great brief for a project that we want to do for our clients means that we have to be, we meaning the agency itself, has to know, where are we going and how are we going to maintain this relationship? Henry works with a lot of big national, international brands, but he also has some local, and regional projects. And the agencies I work for had the same. I worked for the agency in LA that did all the work for Lexus. Team 1 was created from scratch to service nothing but Lexus. And one of the big problems that we faced, and it wasn't my problem, but I heard about it all the time, was if I'm going to come into your agency, speaking now as a potential outside new client, if I'm going to come into your agency, how do I know that, I'm just going to get shunted to the side because you're focusing on Lexus? Am I going to get your best people? Or am I going to be do I get always the juniors, the junior creatives, the junior account folks, the junior planners? How do I know? How do I know? How do I know? So, and we have a lot of folks who are freelancers who watch our show. And I'm guessing we have some agency folks too, but we have teachers. If I were to ask you then, Jason, what kind of advice would you give to someone who isn't an owner yet, a freelancer maybe, but maybe aspires to, maybe I should have my own agency, who are like, you're working with folks kind of up here who want to go even higher. Now we're talking to some folks who are down here who are thinking about this. What advice would you give?
Well, we've talked about most of it now, of really kind of the clarity, the positioning. But one thing I didn't talk about is kind of the personal branding of yourself as well as the team. I rather you do more marketing for yourself and your team than the actual brand, because these people are associated with the brand, right? Because you mentioned something really important about like there was always a joke at Arthur Andersen or the big 5 consulting firms, like the partner would sell the deal and the school bus would drop off the kids that have no idea what's going on. And right, that still happens a lot. But if you can start branding them and they start hearing like they should be doing podcast interviews and creating podcasts, you should be creating content, all that kind of stuff. If they start to get to know them, when they meet, they're already sold. And it's that much easier. But if you're a freelancer and you're thinking about, hey, I want to take this up a notch, because there's nothing wrong with freelancing and you can make a great living in a lifestyle business for you. But the thing is when you're freelancing, everything's depending on you, sales, marketing, delivery, all that kind of stuff, which at first is a really amazing opportunity, but you get into business to create freedom. And then you have no freedom anymore, because now the more clients you bring on, the more work you have, the more stress. So then you start thinking about, well, that's when I would say, go back to that exercise of putting your fist on a sheet of paper and figuring out who is the right people that you need to hire. Is it a project manager? Like, if you're really good at sales, you should hire a project manager. If you're really good at attention to detail, which I am not, right? You should hire, a PM, right? Like, it's like, hire your opposite. You're either hiring someone bringing sales, or you're hiring someone to manage accounts. And then you can start building the layers on that, but it's just a good base. And just think about this. If you're not uncomfortable now, you're going to be uncomfortable later on when your business is not growing and it's going down. So I rather be uncomfortable now, so then I can be comfortable later on, because I can tell you, when you'll go through these different stages too. I remember doing this. Freelancer, you're like, oh, this is nice. And then you start hiring people, it gets more complex. And then I see agency owners, and I've done this myself, where I'll be like, I just want to go back to the fun stage. And when you say that to yourself, it's an indicator that you need the right systems in place.
Yeah.
Right. And I've already touched on some of them. If you go to, the agencymastery360.com and click on playbook, you'll see the other 8 systems. You can look at those. But that's the telltale sign that you need systems. It's kind of like the telltale sign when you say, I'm overwhelmed. Well, when you're overwhelmed, you're giving too much priority to too many things. You need to make a list and then pick the highest one, right? Going back to that analogy with the baseball and the cup first, right? So just remember that as a freelancer, I see so many people kind of peel back and go backwards, which is perfectly fine if that's for you, but the business is going to be totally dependent on you, and you'll have the burden is all on you, rather than you creating an asset that produces wealth, freedom, and predictability for you later on.
What's next for Jason Swenk?
Just continue to build the best community for the agency owners that we're going after, right? Like I was telling you guys, we don't go after everybody. We only go after people that believe in what we believe in, that, want to be resourceful, want to grow, want to have fun, want to, help out others. Like, those are the types of people that we go after. So it's just keep doing content, try to put out the best free and paid content out there. That's really it.
Jason Swenk, the host of the #1 digital podcast, according to his family, Smart Agency Masterclass. Thank you for being with Henry and me on the Brief Brothers.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Good stuff, Henry.
Good stuff, Howard.
He's Henry Gomez.
And he's Howard Eibach. And together we're the Brief Brothers. Till next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.